the dinkies. They only have 4 wheels on them. They're very small. And PE used them on their little local lines around town. And then they came out in 1940 with these modern streamlined streetcars, which were used on the Glendale line and the Venice Short line for a while. And these cars are probably their most famous cars. These were called the Hollywood cars. They had 160 of these cars, and they used them all over the system, but their primary route was the Hollywood Boulevard route, so they were a familiar sight to hundreds, if not thousands and millions of people in Los Angeles and around the world, because they appeared in so many movies. And these wooden cars were wood cars of PE's. I call them the modern era of PE's wood cars, because PE had wooden cars that dated to 1902, and these cars were their 1902 cars that were updated, and they remained in service on the streets of LA until 1940. And these cars here, the 950 cars, they were used on the Venice Short line. That was their home turf. And all these wood-bodied cars that you see here, the 8s, the 9s, the 1000s, the city of LA had told the PE that they had to get rid of all their wood cars by 1940, because the city of LA just did not want wood cars on the street, so they told PE they had to get rid of them all. So by 1940, they had gotten rid of all the 800s. There was 130 of these cars. They were very fast cars, and they were well-maintained cars, but they were all scrapped and burned. Then in 1940, they scrapped them according to age. The 1902 cars, the 950s dated to 1907, the 1000s dated to 1913. So there were 50 of these 950s. So they started scrapping these cars in 1940-41. Then Pearl Harbor came along, and they put a stop to all scrapping of all cars. So the remaining wood cars, all 57 of the 1000s, and the remaining there were 31 of these cars remaining. They scrapped 19 of them. All went through the PE shops, and they ran all through World War II without any problems, carrying people to wherever they needed to go, and down Venice Boulevard and all over the system. Then finally, in 1950, the time caught up with these cars, and the city of LA reinforced that, get rid of all the wood cars. So all these wood cars were gone by 1950, and then all their steel cars, which the Hollywood cars and the various other interurban cars, they were between 1950 and 1960. All the remaining PE lines were wiped out, and the Hollywood cars, a bunch of these Hollywood cars went to Buenos Aires, and along with these streamlined streetcars, they went to Buenos Aires, where they ran for another 35 or 40 years. The more modern era was the PE's all steel cars. These cars here were inherited. They came to the Pacific Electric in 1943. They originally ran up in the Bay Area, Marin County and Oakland, and they had two operations. The Southern Pacific was the parent company of the Pacific Electric, and they had operations all over California, in Oregon and San Francisco Bay Area. So when they discontinued their service over the Oakland Bay Bridge in 1940, all these cars were in a scrapyard. There were several hundred of them that were used in a commuter operation up there over the Bay Bridge. And then when World War II broke out, again, the War Transportation Board put a stop to scrapping. So these cars were sent far and wide. They were used by the Santa Fe Railroad for troop trains, but about 90 of them came down to Southern California, and they were refurbished, and they carried people right up till from 1943 when they came down here. And again, they were in scrap yards. They were to be scrapped, and they were retrieved and came down, and they ran all the way till 1961. These were the last cars to run in LA. Then these cars here, the 1100s, they were built in 1924, and they were built specifically for the Pasadena service on the PE, because they had double doors, as you can see, double doors. They were built for a suburban service, and they were geared for about 50 miles an hour, because they were used up in Pasadena when there were several grades, and so they had to be geared for a slightly lower speed. These cars here, these were PE's premier interurbans. These were the 1200s. These were they had restrooms in them, water coolers, luggage racks. This was the car that I saw that day in 1950, and they were PE's premier interurbans. And when they were removed from service in 1950, they could not find a buyer for them. These 1100s, all 50 of these 1100s went to Buenos Aires with some of the other cars because they had the double doors. But these 1200s, which were good for 70 miles an hour operation, because of the single door, the people in Buenos Aires felt that the modification to put double doors in there would be too costly, and these beautiful cars went to scrap. And along with these cars came from Portland. These cars were known as the San Bernardino 12s because they went to San Bernardino. These cars came from Southern Pacific's Portland operations they came down to PE, and they were affectionately known as the Portland 12s because of the round windows. They're the same as these, but they had round windows, and they were known as the Portland 12. And then again, you have another one of the Hollywood cars. And on the end, you have a PE bus, and that's to scale. You can see how much smaller a bus is to the streetcars. And the rest of these cars here are from various other railroads. This is from Milwaukee, and these are from various operations. This is from the North Shore Railroad. And again, you have all these streetcars and trolley buses. This is a Los Angeles streetcar, a Los Angeles trolley bus, a Los Angeles bus. This particular bus is a model of one of the buses that I own. I have the prototype of this bus. In the box that this bus comes from, it says that the original, the prototype, is owned by Ralph Cantos. So they came out, took measurements of my bus to make that model. And then these are models of Los Angeles streetcars. And this is Toronto, San Francisco, Pittsburgh, Boston, Chicago. These cars were known as the Red Rockets. So they all had their little nicknames. So, and then down here is my Greyhound collection of Greyhound. This is a Japanese commuter car, which I kind of Americanized. I kind of added the PE touch to it by putting skirting on it and everything like that. And then these are various trolleys from different cities. This is from the Indiana Railroad out of Indianapolis, Indiana. And this is in Chicago. This is one of the cars from Chicago that they called the Red Hornets or something like that, the Red Pullmans. And then again, this is a car from the railroad in Chicago. And this car, actually, the prototype of this car actually raced an airplane. These cars went 90 miles an hour. And when they introduced them into service, when they introduced these cars to service, they staged a race between this car and an airplane. And then the streetcar, this interurban car, actually won the race. You know, it went 90 miles an hour. So it was quite a race. So you got quite a. And then again, here's my Greyhound bus collection. This is a San Diego car. This is San Diego, and this is a car from Shaker Heights, and another car from Milwaukee, and this car is from the Lakeshore Electric Railway. Lakeshore was out of Chicago, in the Chicago area, and this particular model was demolished when this display case fell over, and I just put all the pieces in a box. But there was a man who liked to work on models, and he came and took the thing and he put it all back together again. So here it is. And then down here you see various steam locomotives, which I'm also interested in, trains. And many people consider this to be the most beautiful steam locomotive ever built. That's a Southern Pacific GS4, and there's one of these left. Originally there were about 50 of them, and there's just one now, the 4449. And it's owned by the city of Portland, Oregon, and they use it on special occasions, and it's a miracle that it was saved from the scrapper. And these locomotives here were known as the Alco PA locomotives. A lot of the rail fans consider these to be the most beautiful diesel locomotives ever built, and unfortunately, most of them went to scrap. There's only 4 of these left in existence. There was about 200 of them built. They never built as many of these as they did the GM diesels, but the last 4 of them went to Mexico after the Santa Fe quit using them, and then one by one they were involved in accidents, and then they were retired. Well, the 2 that were not involved in accidents, the rail fan groups in Mexico put them on historical display. And the two ones that were wrecked, almost completely destroyed, they were just hulks, were sent back after much negotiations, were sent back to the United States. One has gone to the Smithsonian Institution, and they're going to restore it back to Santa Fe. And the other one is owned by a private owner, and he is restoring it back, even though it's a Santa Fe locomotive, he is restoring it back to look just, see, that's the same type of locomotive, it's one of these alcove. He's restoring it back to look just like his favorite locomotives, because the railroad that he had, the Nickel Plate Road, also had these type of locomotives. So one will be restored to the Santa Fe, and it will be on static display at the Smithsonian Institute, and the other one will be restored as an operable locomotive. And again, up here you see one of those scenic cruiser buses. Those, that's one of my most prized possessions, that model. Again, there was only 1,000 of those actual buses built. I have 2 of them in my collection. That model is a travel agency model that I acquired several years ago, and there was only 50 of those models built. So, man, there was only 50 of those made, so I don't know, I've never seen another one, and that one's in pretty nice condition. I wouldn't sell it for anything. And above it are just various other types of bus models that I...
Do you register these as rare vehicles, buses, with any kind of national registry?
Yeah, there's a thing called the International Bus Collectors Association, and they have a listing of every single antique bus that's still in existence. Anything that, mostly buses, they've bumped up their collectible bus status up into the 1990s, you know. So there are some collectible buses that were built into the early 1990s that are now considered collectibles. So the International Bus Collectors Registry now accepts all those buses, but just about every bus, there are a lot of people that are interested in antique buses, but not nearly as many as steam locomotive and antique cars. We're kind of an eclectic group. So, and all these signs down here came off of various streetcars and buses that I've rescued from junkyards over the years. This train here was the very first streamlined train ever built.
Zephyr.
Yeah, the Zephyr.
To give you a little no, my grandfather was a senior engineer on that.
Wow, yeah.
Chicago to Hanover.
Yeah, those were one of the very earliest internal combustion. That actually spelled the beginning of the end of the steam locomotive from 1934. And
Zephyr.
yeah, and below it is a Hiawatha steam locomotive that's been streamlined. A lot of the railroads resisted dieselization for many years. Yeah, and so they shrouded their steam locomotives in streamlining to make them look more streamlined. So, but the writing was on the wall, and by the last Class 1 major railroad in the United States was the Norfolk and Western, and their locomotives up here those were the last steam locomotive in service in the United States, and they lasted till 1959. Yeah. I think they're absolutely beautiful. They're self-propelled diesel cars. They don't need a locomotive to haul them. They were built in the 1950s. I don't think they're around anymore. There may be 1 or 2 of them preserved. Where, I don't know, but there used to be a travel agency over on Wilshire Boulevard that had one of those in their display case, and it was huge. It was as big as that scenic cruiser model there. Must have been at least 3 or 4 feet long. And I would go and just drool at that model, wishing that they would sell it to me, but they couldn't, you know, and it was beautiful. They were made by Fiat. A little screwdriver, and I rescued that sign, and the streetcar went to Buenos Aires. And that other sign, the one with Hill Street on it, that came off one of the streetcars that was in a scrapyard at Terminal Island. So I've rescued a lot of stuff. And this dirigible up here, that's the Graf Zeppelin. Yeah, that Zeppelin was scrapped during World War, right after Germany, France and England declared war on Germany, and the Hindenburg blew up. They they felt that that thing would be a sitting duck, so it got scrapped. Of all the Zeppelins that were ever built, only two got scrapped. That was the Graf Zeppelin, and the other one was the Navy Los Angeles, which was built in Germany. And all the rest crashed. The Macon, the Akron, and all the other Zeppelins. The Hindenburg, 3 Zeppelins were scrapped. There was one more Zeppelin built after the Hindenburg. The Hindenburg was the LZ-129, and they actually built the LZ-130. The LZ-130 was an exact duplicate of the Hindenburg, except it had helium in it rather than hydrogen. And even if the Hindenburg had not crashed and burned in 1937, the era of the airship would have undoubtedly come to an end, at least as far as transatlantic flights. I love commercial airliners too. As you can see, I've got quite a...
Do you have any of those?
Not because I don't want one. If it was up to me, if I was a millionaire, every airport in this country would have a display of antique airliners open to the public for free. It's just a shame that I've never won the lottery, because this world would be a better place. There would be a lot of antique airliners that would be saved and open to the public free of charge. This is the model. There's the Titanic, and there's the iceberg, and there's the clock. It's 18 minutes to midnight, and that's the last 5 seconds of regular service. After that, they had to issue a new schedule, which only lasted 2.5 hours. So that's a beautiful model. That model was very heavily damaged when this display case fell over, but I did manage to put it back together again. And this little model ship here below it,
Where did you acquire these models?
they're commercial kits.